Some drivers have got a certain something that makes them great. Some drivers turn up and they do alright, and some are just, well, terrible. And it's interesting to see which kind of drivers have come through over the last 75 years. The mid-grid heroes like Fisichella, Trulli and Frentzen. The guys who were good but the other guy was better, like David Coulthard. And the ones who didn't get much done because the car was crap or the driver itself wasn't exactly great either. The 1994 pay drivers spring to mind. Or you get some drivers who are touted as being among the next big things, but the careers go on a different trajectory because of injuries and things like that. Martin Brundle and Johnny Herbert are key examples, and when I finally get around to looking at Johnny's career, you will be surprised, because that man is lucky to be alive. Like, really lucky. Then you've got the drivers who come from places that don't really tend to produce Formula 1 drivers. The main countries, if you want to call them that, are places like the UK, which has produced more F1 drivers, winners and champions than anybody else, and also more Le Mans winners than anybody else, and despite this, the driving standards here are atrocious. Make that make sense. You've also got Brazil. They've had a fair few drivers, and actually when you think about it, every single Brazilian world champion is a multiple world champion. There's Germany, France, Italy, and I guess we can throw Australia in there too. Although Finland has had more F1 champions per capita than Britain has. There's a fun fact for you. But what I'm talking about is countries here like China that's only had one driver. Malaysia has also only had one driver. The Netherlands has had a few but not many, and then you've got Poland, Hungary and even Spain to an extent. The Dutch and the Spanish seem to be more interested in 2 wheels than 4, and there's been other countries that have produced 1 or 2 drivers that have flown under the radar in Formula 1's history. I probably could do a video on drivers that have come from the most unlikely of places, like John Love, who was registered as a Rhodesian driver. Where's Rhodesia, I hear you ask? It no longer exists. It's actually Zimbabwe now, and I think I might have talked about this before at some point, maybe in a video to do with the South African Grand Prix, but I can't really remember. But I'm certain that I've definitely talked about it, but either way, another country that's produced a lot of drivers that tend to fly under the radar is Japan. Suzuki, Nakajima, Katayama and Sato are probably the best known Japanese drivers, and Katayama and Sato have had their own dedicated videos, because Katayama was rated as the best improved driver of the 1994 season, and Sato had an okay career in Formula 1 before heading to IndyCar, where he's now a 2-time winner of the Indy 500. And Sato's best moment in Formula 1 came at the 2007 Canadian Grand Prix, where, in his uncompetitive Super Aguri, okay, it was the previous year's Honda, but stay with me on this, stuck one on Raikkonen and Alonso on his way to Super Aguri's best result. It's quite interesting really, because he done one, as we say here, on Alonso at Canada, and then went on to win the Indy 500 on both occasions that Alonso raced. But after Sato came Nakajima Jr., the son of the Nakajima that raced in the 80s for the likes of Lotus, and as a fun fact, Kazuki Nakajima and Nico Rosberg are one of only 3 partnerships in F1 history where the lineups have both been sons of former F1 drivers. The other 2? Well, I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, it's Damon Hill and Jacques Villeneuve in 1996, and Kevin Magnussen and Mick Schumacher in 2022. Williams is the only team to do this. Twice. And after Kazuki Nakajima, came Kobayashi. Kamui Kobayashi was actually in F1 in 2008. Sort of. He replaced Frank Montagny as Toyota's test and reserve driver while competing in GP2 and GP2 Asia. And every time I look at Toyota's history on websites to put these videos together, I still find it baffling how Toyota just squandered everything. They had pretty much unlimited funds to buy any driver they wanted this side of Michael Schumacher, and instead hired people towards the end of their careers, or people that were just, well, below average. Utterly mental. But Kobayashi would get his first bits of on-track action at the 2009 Japanese Grand Prix, where he did the first 2 practice sessions because Toyota's regular driver in Timo Glock was ill. Timo recovered for Saturday but binned the car and got injured, so they tried to use Kobayashi instead for the rest of the weekend. And this would have been great for Toyota, to have a Japanese driver get his first start at home in a Japanese car, but the FIA said that because Kamui hadn't run at all on Saturday, he wouldn't be able to start the race. Them's the rules. However, Glock's injury turned out to be worse than initially thought. and Kamui was given his first race start at the 2009 Brazilian Grand Prix. In qualifying, he was 11th, and in the race finished 9th, even going as far as to absolutely launch one on Jenson Button into turn 1, while JB was looking to get enough of a good finish to take the championship. And after the race, Jenson called Kobayashi crazy. Jenson did get back in front of Toyota to win the championship with 5th place, and it was actually a repeat of the previous season, because 5th was the same position that Hamilton, a fellow Brit, had been in to win the championship the previous year, while driving car number 22, powered by a Mercedes engine. And the cynics among you would probably think that Glock was faking this injury. Because of what had happened the previous year in 2008, I don't think Glock was going to get the warmest of receptions when he went back to Brazil. Kamui then got points again at Abu Dhabi, qualifying 12th and then finishing a very strong 6th, but it would prove to be Toyota's last race in Formula 1. Like BMW and Japanese carmaker Honda before them, they were going to withdraw. If Toyota had stayed, Kobayashi would have likely had a full-time seat in the 2010 car, that car that seems to gain about 0.3 of a second every time anybody talks about it, but we'll never know how good it actually was. In late December, it was announced that he'd be driving for Sauber instead. Okay, it wasn't Toyota, but at least it stopped him working in his dad's sushi shop, which is where he said he would be working if he didn't become a Formula 1 driver. He retired at Bahrain with hydraulic problems, and then the race at Melbourne didn't exactly go to plan either. His front wing failed and he hit the wall, taking Hülkenberg and Buemi with him. And then in Malaysia, his engine let go, and at China, he was involved in a collision between himself and the 2 Toro Rossos of Buemi and Liuzzi. But at Turkey, he managed to get a point for 10th, but it came after that collision between Vettel and Webber. But his point scores were at least somewhat consistent going through 2010. He scored at Turkey, Valencia, Silverstone, Hungary and Belgium, which wasn't bad for a car like Sauber's at that time. At Valencia, he'd actually been running 3rd for the majority of the race because he was able to nurse his tyres a bit better than everybody else around him. Yeah, I know. We think of him as being this aggressive, lob-it-in, on-the-ragged-edge sorts of drivers like a lot of people assume Jacques Villeneuve was, but his tyre management was incredibly good. He also got points at Japan, Korea and Brazil to take his tally up to 32. And at the end of the season, the late great Murray Walker said that Kobayashi was the best driver that Japan had ever produced, or at least produced at that point. And he outscored and outqualified De La Rosa and Heusinkveld more often than they did to him. Now, okay, De La Rosa was old enough for his bus pass at this point, and Heusinkveld was also getting on a bit, so it's at least expected, in a sense. But for the 2011 season, Sauber would have a young hotshot lineup because Sergio Perez was going to be joining the team. Both cars would be disqualified from the Australian Grand Prix for illegal rear wings, and they managed to score a smattering of points before Kobayashi took his best result so far of 5th in Monaco. He also did incredibly well in the wet in Canada before sliding backwards when it started to dry out, and he was ultimately punted off by Heusinkveld. But he still managed to finish that race in 7th. But then again, that's nothing, because Button did everything he could to not win that race, and still somehow won it. That's not his best drive, by the way. But Kobayashi went through a bit of a rough patch after that. He scored again in Germany, but wouldn't get points again until the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, where he was 10th, and then finished off the season with 9th in Brazil. Like he had been in 2010, he was 12th, and finished with 30 points versus the 32 he had the previous year. At the same time, he doubled teammate Perez's points tally, although Checo had been knocked back slightly due to his massive shunt at Monaco that made him miss that race and the following race in Canada. But for 2012, Sauber was going to have one of its best seasons on record. But Kobayashi had endeared himself to Formula 1 fans all over the world. His aggressive style was very aggressive, and Jenson Button did call him crazy, as already mentioned, but he wasn't so aggressive that he was a danger to everybody else around him. Martin Brundle, who was commentating for the BBC at the time, said that it was like he was getting to the braking zone, forgetting which one of the 2 pedals was the brake, remembering which one was the brake, and still managed to pull the car up into the corner without locking up and still making the apex. And he was doing this without making contact with other drivers left, right and centre, like Maldonado and Grosjean would. It didn't matter if his car was slower than the other guys or not, or whether or not the guy he was racing was on course for a championship or not. He was like one of those old-timey boxers. I'll take on anyone. While he was branded crazy, I don't think anybody ever said it like it was a concern, more out of respect for his ability. Like when we saw Hamilton do stuff through 2007 and 2008, or even Verstappen today. The sort of thing where you go, he's absolutely mental, but it's said as an applause, rather than, you're going to hurt yourself or you're going to hurt somebody else. And like mentioned, despite being aggressive, he could whisper his tyres, much like Perez could, and this was going to help him a bit through the 2012 season. The season of the 7 winners in 7 races, and also the season where those who were better at saving could maintain pace for longer and gain a significant advantage. And Sergio Perez actually credits Kobayashi with teaching him how to whisper his tyres and nurse them, and Perez would use that knowledge to get podiums and almost a win through 2012. So as an addition here, just because I thought of it more in the edit than when I wrote the actual script, Kobayashi had attracted a cult following. And you might have heard this term used for Kobayashi before or for other things. But what we need to clarify here is that the term cult following is a different term to what people might sling around on Twitter as an insult when there's a race on. Yes, we have the Team LH and MV1 cults on Twitter that are as bad as each other, and you've also got the Lando ones starting to get there as a third wheel in the online discourse. But this is a different kind of cult if you follow where I'm going here. A cult following, for those that might not have the term in their country or language, usually means something that might not be the most successful or get the biggest return on investment or just not be the most well known. But those that like that particular thing tend to be incredibly devoted fans and really know their stuff about that particular thing. Whether that's film, television or music. Stuff that will go under the radar for a lot of people, but those that know about it, they really know about it. So for television, it's things like Red Dwarf, Doctor Who, and even Star Trek to an extent. Okay, a lot of people watching this video might know what Star Trek is, but it's still classed as having a cult following. And Doctor Who for that matter. And then you've got British comedies like The Thick of It, Spaced, Big Train, Brass Eye, and even Taskmaster, which is a more modern one. In terms of films, you've got The Big Lebowski, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, and the French film Taxi. And then for music, you've got bands like the Bare Naked Ladies, They Might Be Giants, the Pixies, Primus, and Fish. But Kobayashi was able to get a podium of his own in 2012, and it came at home at Suzuka. It came after sustaining a lot of pressure from his old mate Jenson Button. Thanks to his tyre preservation skills, Kobayashi was able to fend off the McLaren and keep the position, and it was almost some sort of, well, not revenge because that's not the right word, but it showed that he was capable of doing some big things. He'd qualified 4th for that race and finished it in 3rd, holding off a world champion and finishing just 4 seconds behind Massa's Ferrari, with everybody a long way off Vettel, who had romped off into a 20-second lead come the end. It meant that Kobayashi was the first Japanese driver to take a podium since Sato did in 2004, and the first to do it at home since Aguri Suzuki in 1990. Earlier in that season, Kobayashi was 2nd on the grid at that race at Spa, and probably could have got a podium there too. But that was the race where Grosjean did his pro gamer move and became the reason that super license penalty points exists. But it's all speculation. There's no guarantee that Kobayashi would have been in 2nd or 3rd come the end of that race, because Alonso would have likely come through and Vettel and Raikkonen were also charging. So it's all ifs, buts and maybes. But it's one for you to have a debate about, I guess. Even though Perez had 3 podiums to his name that season, Kobayashi was the more consistent driver in terms of points scored. 6 points was all that separated them come the end of the year, and that's not bad going. Perez outqualified Kamui 20-19 in their 2 years together, but Kobayashi did better in races, winning that 21-16. So while evenly matched over a single lap, Kobayashi had the race advantage. But for 2013, fans were going to be left disappointed as there would be no cult hero on the grid for that year. In the interim, he did the World Endurance Championship for AF Corsa, driving a Ferrari 458 GTE. And he also tested a Ferrari F1 car for a promotional event in Moscow, where he crashed. At Le Mans, that Ferrari GTE finished 5th in class in a very tricky race all round, because it rained and several massive accidents happened, resulting in a total of 12 safety car periods, which is mad, even for Le Mans. It's actually a record. And someone can correct me here, but was Le Mans using local slowdowns at this point? I forget how Le Mans does yellows these days. Is it only bring out a safety car if it's absolutely necessary now or back then? I really can't remember. But for the 2014 season, Kamui was back, and everyone liked that. It wasn't the best team to return to Formula 1 with, because Caterham, much like fellow Minnows Marussia, was struggling big time. Not only did they not have the facilities to develop the car, they were also at a major disadvantage when buying the new and expensive hybrids that Formula 1 had switched to for that year. And on top of that, Caterham was running Renault engines, which were the least powerful on the grid and the least reliable. But in the early part of the season, Kobayashi was still returning okay results, at least for the team he was in. He ran as high as 8th at Malaysia and ultimately finished 13th, and that put Caterham in a good position. Since down at the bottom of the standings, the position is based off best results, you know, when they all score 0 points. It's why Riccardo Rossi, a long-established meme driver in Formula 1, finished above Olivier Panis in the 1998 season, because his best result of the season was better than the Frenchman's. But ultimately, things fell apart for Caterham, as described in a video I've already done on the team. Finances were in the mud, sponsors were dropping like flies, Ericsson's money wasn't balancing the books, and Andre Lotterer was brought in for the Belgian Grand Prix, which unsettled Kobayashi. And to make things worse for Caterham, Jules Bianchi scored points at the Monaco Grand Prix, and that condemned Caterham to bottom spot in the standings, where no money would be paid out. After Bianchi's tragic accident at Suzuka, Caterham and Marussia were really in trouble. Marussia ran one car in Russia out of respect before both teams no-showed the US and Brazilian Grand Prix. But some crowdfunding done by fans of Kobayashi allowed the team to return for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which would be Kamui's last outing in an F1 car, at least competitively. He lasted 42 laps before he retired with a vibration. But since leaving Formula 1, Kobayashi has had quite the successful endurance career. In 2016, he hooked back up with Toyota in LMP1 and won his first race at Fuji in that season. In 2017, he set the lap record at Le Mans with a 3:14.7, which won't be beaten anytime soon because of the hypercars lapping in the, 320 range or something like that. But his crowning achievement came when he, along with Mike Conway and Jose Maria Lopez, won Le Mans in 2021. His tyre-saving abilities allowing him to extract a little more performance for longer. At least, that's how it seems. And he's still with Toyota even now. He's 6th in the standings at the time of writing, and from what I've read, he's now the team principal. That's cool. Even though his Formula 1 career was rather short, and I tend to focus more on the Formula 1 stuff for those who are multidisciplined, Kobayashi became a cult favourite. The way he drove endeared him to fans, and to try and get a gauge of how he did, I've been online and dug up every race he retired from. And you expect with drivers like Kobayashi for their retirements to be mostly because of collisions, because they were pushing too hard and things like that. And when we get round to doing Grosjean, we'll look at the whole trying to race those who were clearly faster when they should have settled mentality that Grosjean had early on in his career. And you'd think Kobayashi would be the same, because he was trying to race everybody irrespective of how superior their car was. But he wasn't. In 75 Formula 1 starts, he retired 22 times. But how many of those were crash outs? I'll give you a second to have a guess. The answer? 4. How many of those were his fault? 2. Once when he stuffed it into the Wall of Champions at Canada in 2010, and again at Singapore, where he also walled it. The other retirements listed as collisions brings it to 6, but these were caused by other factors, such as Australia 2014, which was the result of brake failure, and Australia 2010, when his front wing failed. So while aggressive, he wasn't a weapon on track taking everybody else out. He crashed himself out twice, which is probably better because you've not taken somebody else with you. And many of you will probably say that Kobayashi was better than others who have had longer careers, and probably should have had a bit longer in the sport given how quick he could be. He probably wasn't champion material, but certainly quick enough to grab a couple of race wins here and there. Swap him with Hülkenberg, and maybe this video would be about Nico rather than Kamui. And one thing that Kobayashi didn't have was significant backing. And that's something to think about when you've got Ericsson at Caterham bringing substantial funds, and also Perez bringing his Mexican Vodafone money. What was Kobayashi bringing? Well, that's a good question. And you look at the likes of Frentzen and Trulli and Fisichella, and you'd say that if Kobayashi had careers as long as they did, he'd probably have got the same return, so long as the cars remained somewhat competitive. Frentzen had, was it 3 wins, 4 wins? Fisichella had 3 and Trulli just the 1. But Trulli was a hot lap merchant, and if the races were just 1 lap long, he'd probably have way better stats. Kobayashi could have had a Frentzen 99 style season at one point if the stars aligned, but we'll never know. And I've been diving through the internet archives to see what others have been saying, and a lot of people have been saying that the yardstick for Kobayashi was actually Sergio Perez. They were evenly matched as we saw earlier, but Perez ended up being a better tyre saver, and Sauber would often put the two cars on alternate strategies, so Kobayashi would be coming through later on in the race. But he still had to make the most of his earlier stints. Neither of those two drivers were ever going to be world champion, but they were good enough. And Kobayashi's status of cult hero looks to be passed down to Tsunoda, at least if he can get that Red Bull working for him. But Kobayashi had flair, He had balls, he could lob a car in and have it stick, he was aggressive, but he was fair and clean. And he seems to be a nice guy as well. I've listened to a bit of his Beyond the Grid interview to get some bits together for this, but these videos are more facts and stats, and also to see if we can get the full story from those facts and stats, or if these statistics don't really paint the best picture. And there's probably video compilations of his best overtakes, including the last lap send on Buemi at Valencia one year, and that is going to introduce new people to the legend that is Kamui Kobayashi. Oh, and the time he sent it on both the Red Bulls at Brazil on a slick track. You know when Martin Brundle said thank God for Max Verstappen when Lewis Hamilton was dominating and Formula 1 went a little bit, well, boring is probably the operative word. But during the Vettel years and when Vettel was dominating with Red Bull, what we should have been saying in the early 2010s is, thank God for Kamui Kobayashi. So then, a look at Kamui Kobayashi, Formula 1's early 2010s cult hero. If this has been an interesting look through the F1 history books, then do drop a like on the video so I know a good job was done. And for more stuff from the channel, get subscribed and also get that bell on so you never miss out on any future stuff that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the rad lads over at Patreon who continue to support me at a more personal level, and if you want to help out with images and keeping the lights on around here, there's a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and anything else you might want or need to know. Or there's super thanks if you want to top up my coffee cup or otherwise do a one and done donation, and memberships so you can Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.